Tonight's event is being hosted by the university's Institute for Creative Enterprise, or ICE for short. I have two introductions to make before we kick off the event proper. First is Director of ICE, Professor Roger Shannon. Roger is Professor of Film and Television within the Department of Media. His current research interests focus on UK film policy,
and you, Miss Dickinson, what of you?
What of me, sir?
Will you not kneel and give yourself to God?
No, sir, I will not kneel.
Obviously can only pause for so long. Okay. So back to Roger's research. UK film policy, independent film, and his most recent project has seen him involved in the cultural revival of the work of the early 20th century Glasgow innovator Helen Bigger. Before he became a colleague of mine here at Edge Hill, Roger had a significant career in the film industry. He's been associated with more than 20 UK feature films, including Festival, Butterfly Kiss and Under the Skin. His long list of collaborators include Jimmy McGovern, Michael Winterbottom and Frank Cottrell-Boyce. And his work has been honoured at film festivals such as Cannes, Toronto, Berlin, Edinburgh and Sundance. He's not left the film industry behind by any means, and in 2013 was an advisor on Penny Walcott's award-winning 1 Mile Away. He was also producer on the music documentary Made in Birmingham, Punk Reggae Bhangra. Secondly, I'm very privileged to introduce director and screenwriter Terence Davis, and also, of course, Honorary Doctorate at Edge Hill University, who's going to be in conversation with Roger this evening. Terence Davis has made an outstanding contribution to British cinema and culture and has become one of the leading and most respected directors of his generation. His films have won major awards at international film festivals, including Cannes, where in 1988 he was the winner of the International Critics' Prize. In 2007, he was awarded the prestigious fellowship by the British Film Institute in recognition of an outstanding contribution to film culture. His films have excited and inspired filmmakers, film critics and academics alike, and he's been cited as Britain's greatest living filmmaker. His films offer intimate portraits of working class life, presented lyrically the highs and lows of family emotions, love, grief and a poetry of the everyday. His unique film style, notable for symmetrical visual compositions and a measured pace, re-establishes the past as a fragmented memories and loosely connected episodes. His first two feature films, Distant Voices, Still Lives from 1988, and The Long Day Closes from 1992, are autobiographical films that draw on his family experiences in Liverpool in the 1940s and 50s, and are his most celebrated films in their rich evocation of working class culture in the post-war decades. The films recall community and lives woven together by wireless cinema visits and collective singing in public houses. He's also successfully adapted a number of classic literary sources for films where the lead actresses have won major awards and acclaim. These include John Kennedy Toole's The Neon Bible in 1995, starring Gina Rowlands, Edith Wharton's The House of Mirth in 2000 with Gillian Anderson in the lead role, and in 2011 at The Deep Blue Sea featuring Rachel Weisz. In recent years, he's worked successfully with Liverpool production company Hurricane Films. His award-winning documentary of Time in the City, which we're going to see an extract of later on, was a very personal portrait of his home city. The film was premiered at the 2008 Cannes Film Festival and blends news footage of Liverpool with contemporary music to create a bittersweet visual reflection on Liverpool. Although it was his debut documentary as a filmmaker, Of Time in the City received ecstatic reviews when premiered at Cannes. His most recent productions are the 2014 adaptation of the classic Scottish novel Sunset Song, and in 2015, A Quiet Passion, the life of the acclaimed American poet Emily Dickinson, who's played by Cynthia Nixon. With these recent films, the accolades have continued. The Independent's 5-star review of A Quiet Passion called the film a masterpiece of mood and an exceptional film with a searing central performance. In their equally enthusiastic review, The Guardian commented, "Above all, though, it is Davis's ability to invest even the most apparently humdrum moments with some form of intense radiance that sustains his film. Every shot is beautifully composed and lit, as we've come to expect, and the actors deliver every line with absolute conviction." We're very fortunate to have such a unique and celebrated filmmaker with us this evening. My pleasure to hand over to Roger and Terence Davis. Thank you.
So I'd like to thank Andrea for that great introduction, and I'm delighted that we have Terence back here on campus. And this summer, he graciously received the award of Honorary Doctorate and gave a fantastic response to the citation, quoting Emily Dickinson, as I recall. And I'll return to Emily Dickinson later on, because Terence is hot foot back from the Berlin Film Festival, where his new film, A Quiet Passion, was world premiered and received the ecstatic reviews in The Guardian that Andrea just recalled. But I want to start this conversation, Terence, today by going back in time to 1986, 87, 88, when he was making the film that really launched his career, Distant Voices, Still Lives. And I'm sure many of you in the audience this evening will know that film, which is about how we remember, how memories are constructed, and how, when we look back, how we recreate memory, and our memory of particular significant moments. So I'm going to ask a very prosaic question about memory, which is how Terence remembers that period, the memories he has of making that film that broke him really into the film industry, and we'll move on after that to more recent forays in filmmaking. But how do you now recreate your memory of that time?
Well, I just finished the trilogy, which took 10 years to make, and it was very much an apprentice work, and it was taken to the New York Film Festival, and I was given enough money so that I could go there too, and it was a little theatre on 37th Street, I think, and the first night, my first cue, oh, fabulous, and then the second night, my first demonstration, this body of men and women thought it was absolutely disgusting and paraded with these cards saying it's disgusting. So I came back sort of with very mixed feelings, because when we went further, we went over to San Francisco, and that was the time when it was great to be gay, and I never felt that. I don't like being gay. It's ruined my life. We showed it, and this critic said, these films make Ingmar Bergman look like Jerry Lewis, which is almost a compliment, don't you think? Anyway, I came back and went into the BFI and said, thank you for sending me over. I never ever thought I'd get to New York and walk through Central Park and all that stuff. And they said, we want to commission you. And I said, oh.
Why me?
Why? He said, and it was Peter Sainsbury. He said, no, we want you to do something. So I said, well, I think I've got an idea about the earliest part of my family. I'm the youngest of 10 children. And I thought, well, I'll concentrate just on my mother and father, my two elder sisters, and my eldest brother, because I couldn't have coped with a larger cast, because I was still very inexperienced. Anyway, I wrote Distant Voices, and we shot it. And it got very good reactions, and people started to say, well, let's put it into festivals. And I said, please don't put it into any festivals. There's another part to it. I just know there is. And they said, fine. And they waited for 2 years whilst I wrote and directed Still Lives. And then we put it out. And it did have wonderful notices, I must say. But the great thing about memory is my great revelation was one night on BBC One, when I was 18, Alec Guinness read from memory over 4 nights the whole of the 4 quartets. I was absolutely knocked out. I didn't understand any of it, but I had to go and buy them. And I read them now once a month, because it's about the nature of time, mortality, and memory, and how you configure a memory. And the problem with cinema is it's always in the eternal present. When you cut from this to that, you read it as the next thing which happened. When you see a dissolve, whether you realize it or not, you always read it as time passing, either forward or backward. And what do you do if you try and combine those things? Because memory is not about remembering before the memory and after the experience. It's the burning moment there. That's what you remember. And that should be powerful. And I was groping towards a kind of non-linear narrative that didn't rely on what happens next, because what happens emotionally next is much more interesting. And all the great films, and a lot of them are commercial films too, always make a point of it's the next emotional thing that happened, like Letter from an Unknown Woman. It's one of the greatest film about unrequited love. But it's all, you read the actual novella that Stefan Zweig wrote, not only is she not beautiful, at the end of the novella, he can't even remember who she is. But Ophuls knew that you couldn't do that, that would be just too harsh. So he makes him remember and go out and fight the duel, and obviously he's going to be killed. But it glides between what was remembered and what was felt. And sometimes memory comes from nowhere, like that. You can be sitting there and you smell grass and you think, I'm back in my primary school in Edge Lane all those years ago, standing outside waiting for Prince Philip to drive past in a car who looked completely bored stiff, as they all are. But that happens in a moment. A smell can do the same. I can still smell Fridays, because those, I was allowed to go for my sister's makeup across the road to Stevenson's Chemist. It was pan stick, majestic red lipstick, majestic red nail varnish, and 15 denier nylons, American tan, no seam, because seams were considered rather tarty. But I can smell that. And when Friday nights come, even now, even though I'm 70, for God's sake, I sit down and I put something on and I think, yes, I can remember waiting for them to come in. They came around about 5 or 6 o'clock. Oh, it was heaven. It was absolute heaven. And then being taken to the movies. I mean, I was taken to the movies when I was 7. My father just died, and we began to live because he was extremely violent.
This would be a cinema in Liverpool.
It was in the Odeon, London Road, and it was Singing in the Rain. What an introduction. I mean, I was too young to appreciate Gene Hagen's wonderful comic performance, but you look at that title sequence and it is from only 8 camera positions. There are 9 cuts, but only 8 camera positions. And it's astonishing, even now. Even when you know that they had to mix milk with the water in order that the rain would photograph, and he got a flu, and it took 3 days to shoot. I don't care. It's one of the greatest moments in cinema. And I remember bursting into tears. And my sister said, "What are you crying for?" I said, "Well, he just looks so happy." You're supposed to say, "Ah." Fabulous.
Well, in Distant Voices, Still Lives, you use a repertoire of filmic means to conjure up memory. You use song, you use language from the period, you use obviously the fashion, and also in the clip we'll see there's evidence of the pan makeup that you've just referred to and the lipstick as your sisters get ready for an evening out. And as someone who had seen the film many years ago and revisited it of late, it was such a delight to welcome your sisters to the university when you received your honorary doctorate, having seen them fictionalised in your film. It was such a treat. So it was an honour to meet your family, having seen them in their fictionalised lives in the film and knowing something about the dramatic storyline of your family.
But I do have to say, when they all came down to see it in London, they came back to my flat, they didn't say anything, and they looked around and said, "Nice shelves."
Let's have a look at this is a clip from Distant Voices, Still Lives, and it's the chapter Eileen, Mickey and Jingles.
R-A-G-L-O-P-P-P, rack mop. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, rack mop. God, isn't it hot? I'm sweating past myself. Oh, it's red. Oh, God, that's all I need. Oh, he's harmless.
I am, Mick.
Die.
Oh, what you're throwing away.
God help him, poor gobshite. Do you remember Formby? Oh, and that tent. Oh, God, blimey.
I never.
You did.
I never.
You did!
I never.
You did, Bart!
I never.
I thought you'd killed her, you know, Mickey. I know, so did I. When I think about it, I was a real cow with that mallet, wasn't I? Do you ever see Jingles?
No. Not since she married Les.
It's wonderful. It's marvelous. Jingles, you came. They try to sell us egg through your... So are you kids? Are you still married?
Oh, God, yeah. 2 kids on the radio, grabs the board. You have it on tonight. Still not a one. I know, still ain't so quick. What did you do? Which that? You're looking well, Miss Folly. What's that? Isn't it Jingles? Do you know why I saw us as well last week? No. Did you? Remember the way we used to make them dead twisted it like that? Yeah. Oh,
God, I love you, that's a...
Whoa, it's Saturday. Yeah, it's Saturday.
Kiss me, you fool. That's him. He's come to taxi. Well, you know these seamen. Money's no object.
I've signed myself out of hospital. I've walked on.
It's gone. My Tommy's gone.
Won't you say to her, Dad?
I'm only going for the season.
Do you know what? If I ever get a gun, I'll blow your bleeding brains out.
Ta-ra, Mum.
Bye, love. Don't forget to write now, will you?
With the horse, Dad's on the left.
So with Distant Voices Still Lives and your subsequent film, The Long Day Closes, your films broke new ground in depicting the community that you came from, sort of northern working class community. And critics writing about your films have pointed out that you combined aspects of British social realism with a concern of filmmaking influenced by more European traditions, focusing on personal preoccupations, on about sexuality and the impact of context on people's lives. And in fact, the film writer Derek Malcolm at the time described your films in this way: musical versions of Coronation Street directed by Robert Bresson, with additional dialogue by Sigmund Freud and Tommy Handley. A bit tongue-in-cheek perhaps, but if the critics see your films or saw those early films in that vein, how did you see it? What were the influences that were working through you at the time? Do you think the writers like Derek Malcolm were right in assuming there was an influence coming from these different filmmaking traditions?
I mean, I didn't know who Robert Bresson was until I went to film school. I had no idea. We didn't see any kind of Nouvelle Vague films or anything like that. My education came on a Sunday afternoon on BBC One. It was a series called Love Story, and we got Letter from an Unknown Woman, Night of the Hunter, for God's sake, you know, All That Heaven Allows, all those things which I grew up on, women, what were called women's pictures those days. And so you don't realize you're absorbing film language, but whenever I went to see anything, I could always remember great stretches of dialogue and also scenes, how the mise en scène, as they say. I thought everybody did that, because nobody told me that they didn't. You know, and I would come home and I would be reciting the words and being intoxicated by these images, especially when CinemaScope came out, because it was The Robe. And I can still remember that it was in the Palladium, West Derby Road, and the curtains went back and the audience gasped. I can still remember that gasp. And the best person in it was Caligula, who was as camp as Christmas, who walked around this little cocktail number. I thought he was fabulous. I thought, when I grow up, I want to be Caligula. And the very first time I went to America, they said, I went to Los Angeles, said, who do you want to meet? And I said, I want to meet Jay Robinson. They said, who? I said, Jay Robinson. He played Caligula in The Robe and Demetrius and the Gladiators. And he came, I had tea with him. I said, I can still remember all your scenes. He said, you can't? I said, yes, I can. But I grew up with that tradition of big films, and the main people in it were women. And I was very close to my sisters. I loved my brothers, but like most gay men, you tend to like the company of women because they're much funnier and they don't like sport. Thank God. So it was all those things which you don't realise, but also things like the British comedy of the period. Now, those days you had the support picture, you had a cartoon, and then you had the big picture. When it was drama, it was always the American. When it was a British comedy, that was always the big picture, because we had the best comedians, you know, hundreds of them, wonderful people, wonderful people. As soon as you came on, you could feel the audience feel the love for someone like Cecil Parker, who only ever did, you know, small roles, but you could feel the love for him, and so there was that as well. I mean, there's a moment in Man in the White Suit when he locks his daughter Joan Greenwood in this room with Alec Guinness, and he's trying to be assertive, and he knocks on the door and he goes, "It's Daddy. Come out." And she says, "No." He goes, that little bit, you never forget it. So it's all those little things too. And going to see, the Hippodrome, it's long gone now, Battle of the River Plate, which is really boring. But the short that was on with it was The Red Balloon, which was like being hit in your heart. I just wept and wept. I just could not stop crying. Because at the end of that film, you feel that when they burst that balloon, they've committed murder. And then all the balloons of Paris come to that child. Oh, God, what a revelation. So it's things like that as well.
The local cinemas that you would have gone to were your form of film school there, in essence.
Yes, and there were 8 within walking distance and another 8 in town.
Also, the film you just mentioned, The White Man in the White Suit, with an Ealing film, the cinematographer of that film and many Ealing films sadly passed recently. He was 104, Douglas Slocum. So he shot all those Ealing great movies. He died a couple of days ago, so I think it's a sad time to be remembering the Ealing films. It just strikes me that what a great project would be to take you to some of these old cinemas, some of which are still in existence, and I think, although the site of them is there, but to get you waxing filmically about movies at at the sight of them.
They were such a powerful influence that
Long Day Closers was shot in the Futurist, wasn't it?
Yes.
It was shot in the Lime Street Futurist.
I not only remember when I saw them, I know the route I took and where I sat. I mean, it's that vivid. It's like as if it were this afternoon. And I knew, and I took a special route to each one. They're all different routes to the Palladium or the Hippodrome or the Lytton, or the Cosy or the Casino. They were all different, and they all had different qualities. And I remember that, and I remember it being such a wonderful experience that the lights would go down, the curtains would go back. Not like now we sit in a oblong room, and there are no curtains. I mean, I'm sorry.
Your Liverpool set films drew on autobiographical narratives that hinged on community, family, class, and the exuberance of your sisters and your mother pitched against an abusive father. Now in between, because I'm coming now more onto the current films that you've been premiering. But in between, you have made several films in the States, The Neon Bible, with Gina Rowlands. There's also the adaptation of Edith Wharton's House of Mirth, and then you adapted Terence Rattigan's The Deep Blue Sea. And then the most recent film that's been on release in the UK, which I think some people in the audience will have seen, Sunset Song, does return to some of the similar kind of storylines that we had in Distant Voices, Long Day Closers, where you have in the role of Peter Mullen in the movie an abusive father and husband, and the trials and tribulations that the family face. And we'll see a clip, not just now but shortly. But I wanted to ask, was it a conscious return to some of those stories that are similar to Distant Voices, or was it something to do with the long gestation of the film, because it may have developed at the time you were exploring those types of motifs in films?
Not really. I mean, it took 18 years to make Sunset Song, but I'm drawn to the stories, and they happen to be about women. They just happen to be that, and I do. Unless I can feel what these characters feel, there's no point in me doing it, because it would just be dead. But the next two films are about men. But it's the stories that, when I read House of Mirth, I saw the opening. As soon as I can see the opening, and I know what the shots are, and I know what's on the soundtrack, I think, okay, we can do it now. Sometimes you read until the end of the novel, like with Mother of Sorrows, which I hope I'll shoot this year. It wasn't until the end, which is the most wonderful ending. I just thought, this is going to make a good film. Luckily, the producer said yes. And I'm going to do a film about Siegfried Sassoon.
Oh, well, I want to come on to that towards
the end. They happen to be about men. But the stories are that which you read and you think, can I make it? Do I see it? And if I don't see it and I don't hear it, then, I will always say no. I mean, I was sent a gangster film once. What do I know about the underworld? Nothing. I said, why did you send it to me? I mean, I've never taken drugs. Well, the odd bottle of Tixie Licks, but that's just between you and I. And I don't know about drugs. And if there were a car chase, it would be two cars going very slowly. That's not foot tapping. I'm sorry. So you get things like that. Or I got a Jane Austen thing, and it starts with the maid coming down and dropping a jug of water. And I said, well, the first thing she would have done in the morning was empty the chamber pot. Oh, we can't have that in. I said, why? Didn't they go to the lavatory those days? He said, no, not in Jane Austen. Fine.
In Sunset Song, you've introduced a remarkable young actress, Agnes Dean, who plays Chrissy in Sunset Song, your film version of Lewis Grassic Gibbon's iconic story, Scottish literature. She, a local young woman from Bolton, which is great, and she, I think, is remarkable in the film. And your camera does concentrate a lot in the movie on her face, and it's just luminous in the way that you film her. As she's new to filmmaking, I wondered how you found her and whether she'd done previous work or whether she was known to the producers, because I'm going to single out, because we have in the room Sol, who's from Hurricane Films. It's produced the most recent films by, can you just wave so people know? Sol, producer Sol from Hurricane Films produced the recent films.
No, I know nothing about popular culture. I certainly don't know about who's a model or not. I just don't know. And she was the first person on that Monday morning to come. It was the Hubbards who helped me cast it. It was their stroke of genius. And I came up the stairs, she looked about 11. I thought, God almighty, she's far too young. And anyway, she came in and she gave this wonderful audition. And I said to Sol, we found her, first day, like that. And you can tell. I don't know how you can tell, you just feel it. And it's the same when I'm casting crew as well. People come in, you just think, they're right. I can't tell you why, I know they're right. And she was quite wonderful. I think she's a real find. I think she's a really great actress with a remarkable ear and one of the loveliest people I've ever worked with.
Well, I thought she's very strong in the film because the father and the husband in the film is played by Peter Mullen, who's a scary guy anyway, whatever role he's in. And she holds her own playing against him, which I think is a sign of an exceptional talent. Peter Mullen plays, in a sense, the Peter Postlethwaite role in the film, harking back to Distant Voices. Now, it's been on release of late, Sunset Song, and we have a short clip to play, which is at Chrissy's wedding, and it, in a way, it's reminiscent in a way of the wedding scenes and the communal singing that resonates through Terence's best work. So this is a clip from Sunset Song, which was on release about 3-4 months ago.
Dear God,
do the lights.
Bless this union. Give them strength and courage for the difficulties that the years might bring to them. Make fruitful their marriage, and make their love as pure and enduring in its fulfillment as in its conception.
Here's to you, Chris. Raise your glasses, folks. The best man has a toast. I've never seen a sweeter bride or known a better friend than the groom. I wish them long and lovely days, from the summer to the winter of their lives. The bride. Best of luck to her!
That made the bed for me.
A song from the bride.
I've heard them lilting at the milking lassies a lilting before dawn o' day. sighing and mourning on Elka green lawn. The flowers of the forest are a weed away.
And a great voice as well from Agnes Dane. The gap you mentioned between beginning to think about Sunset Song and getting it made, in some ways has been a sort of characteristic part of your filmmaking career, with gaps between trying to raise money and funding. And here we are now with Sunset Song, as we've just seen a clip from, which was on cinemas in November and December, and your hot foot back from Berlin with a film that's just premiered. So there's two films within the space of 4 or 5 months from Terence Davis. So
and I fear I'm becoming prolific.
Exactly. My point entirely. Now, before we talk about this latest film, and which you well premiered in Berlin, I just want to read something that has been published only within the last several days, and it's from the New Yorker magazine, and it's by one of their film critics, Richard Brody, who happened to see the film in Berlin. I've not seen the film yet. We'll see a short clip from it after we've had a bit of a chat. But the writing in the New Yorker about the film, I thought was particularly worthy of just making it more publicly known, because Richard Brody says this, so if you can bear with me for a minute or two. A Quiet Passion is one of the rare movies about a writer that convey the sense that the character is capable of artistic creation at a world historical height of achievement. Norman Mailer said that the one character that novelists can't successfully create is that of a novelist better than themselves. Similarly, no filmmaker can make a movie that's as good as a good novel or story or play unless that filmmaker is an artist at the same level as the writer. No filmmaker can create a convincing portrait of an artist without being an artist of comparable imagination. Davis has been for 30 years among the world's best filmmakers, certainly not as concealed or unheralded in his time as Emily Dickinson was in hers, but not nearly receiving the acclaim or the support that he has deserved. A Quiet Passion will take its place as one of his finest creations, as one of the great movies of this time. I can't wait to see it again and to see it become widely available. It ought to make quite a splash. So that's a real appetite-whetting review, and of course, we are graced this evening, not just with Terence being here, but the fact that we'll see a clip from the film, because the only people who've seen it so far in a public arena has been when it world premiered in Berlin. So with Terence being hot foot from Berlin, we are able to have a look at it. It's a film portrait. I won't call it a biopic, which is a sort of hand-me-down term to describe the life of someone. It's more of a film portrait of the American poet, and I'd just like you to give us a bit of an introduction to it, because it's, with all the other films we mentioned, we probably have got quite a lot of information about them. We may have seen them, but this is something which can only at the moment live from your words, really, and the clip will show.
Well, I suppose it's because she didn't receive the fame that she should have done. And I feel an immense, my heart goes out to her, because she ought to have been celebrated. And that's the reason I think I like Bruckner, is one symphony that was a success. Everything else, sometimes the whole audience walked out, and there were more players on the platform than there were in the audience. My heart goes out to them, because these people are geniuses. And when I first, there used to be a thing on Granada on a Sunday morning, a little half-hour slot, and it was documentary. 15 minutes on one person and 15 minutes on another. And the first one was about a ballerina and Tom Jones when he was very young. And the next week it was about Emily Dickinson. And it was Claire Bloom. And she read the very first poem, "Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality." And I had to go out and buy them. I just had to go out and buy them. I was still a lowly bookkeeper in an accountancy practice. I was 18. Never thought that I would make films, never thought that I would make anything about her. But what I'm always moved by is when people are courageous in the face of great difficulties. And she was writing at a time when what people wanted were flowery, sentimental nonsense about birth and death. And she didn't do that. Longfellow was very popular because of that bloody awful octosyllabic rhyme, which you can't get out of your head. By the shores of Gitchigum, the shining big sea water stood the wigwam of the Combs, daughter of the moon that comes. Behind her rose the forest, rose the black and gold, and it goes on forever. It's longer than Wagner, for God's sake. Walt Whitman, unreadable, but you read her and it leaps out at you as being extraordinary original. And the thing that I think the poem that moved me most of all is she wrote it in the middle of her career, not at the end of her life, which is implied here. It's a very small poem. "This is my letter to the world that never wrote to me, the simple truth that nature told with tender majesty. Her message is committed to hands I cannot see. For love of her, sweet countryman, judge tenderly of me."
Just pausing while Emily Dickinson's words.
And I hope she's up there looking down, and I hope she's got a wry smile on her face and thinking, I feel a poem coming on.
Now, the role of Emily Dickinson in your film is played by Cynthia Nixon, who's mostly known for her role in Sex and the City, and in a way repeating the attention you paid to, say, Agnes Dean in Sunset Song. You've found a female performer who perhaps was unknown in the type of movies that you make, but mostly was known for TV work or theatrical work, or in the case of Agnes Dean as a model. But you've found something in Cynthia Nixon, and all the reviews that have come out from Berlin all attest to a fantastic performance by her. But as you say often, Sex and the City was completely unknown to you.
No, alas, it was. I'd met her for a film I couldn't get the money for. And I really don't like Sex and the City. I think it's actually quite pernicious. If it's all about going to bed with someone, eating and buying, what about compassion? What about empathy? What about humanity? I said to her, I find it absolutely pernicious. And she was very graceful about that. Anyway, I'd not forgotten her. And when I was writing this, I thought, she's the one, she's right. And Sol, who was in a former life a photographer, took her photograph. And there's only one extant photograph of Emily Dickinson, which we saw, a little daguerreotype when she was 17. And he superimposed the two faces, and she looked exactly like her. And I just knew, I knew she was right. She said, do you want me to read? I said, no. When we were shooting, we spent an afternoon doing all the poetry. And I said, well, we'll just use it as a guide track, because some of the shots are timed to the poem. And then when we were in post-production, her agent said, do you want to do any ADR? That's additional recording. And I said, no, they're just wonderfully read. And when we met, when I said to her, will you do it? She said yes. And she stayed with it for 2 years, She was really loyal, and which was wonderful. And she said, when my mother died, I got home and some Emily Dickinson ran through my head. I thought, she knows this poetry, because it's very hard to get. Most American actors don't read poetry. They don't learn it at the equivalent of drama school. Well, here you have to do a poetry class every week. So I was actually quite worried. But when she said that, I thought, I know she's right. And as in all the films, really, all those performances were got in less than 4 takes. Very often 1 or 2. That was it. Because you've got to capture the moment.
Very economical.
But when they come on, you can just tell that they're on the ball today. Sometimes you have to sort of tweak it a little and say, no, could you actually not do that? Could you say this? And let the emphasis fall on that. But she'd say, can I change that word? And I said, of course you can. If it feels better to change it, then change it. You know, it's not written in stone. You know, you have to think of it in terms of an orchestra when they play through a new piece for the first time. The oboist might say, well, you know, I can't get from A flat to G major in that amount. I haven't got enough breath. And of course you change it. And she was doing it because she was absolutely committed, as they all were. And it was a joy to see them come on and want to do it, you know.
Well, let's have a look. And you are the first audience outside of the Berlin Film Festival to see a clip. And it's on now.
Will you go with us to church, Miss Buffum?
Of course not. Going to church is like going to Boston. You only enjoy it after you've gotten home.
We are to pray for the repose of our late pastor's soul.
Doesn't that rather depend on where it's gone?
We shall become fast friends.
Of course we shall. I'm irresistible. Everyone says so. When the new pastor does arrive, you must point him out to me.
So that you too may be saved.
No, so that I will know whom to avoid. Don't enjoy your praying too much. It might become habit-forming.
Great. Very funny. So the rumours that you'll be directing the 3rd part of the Sex and the City trilogy are untrue.
Yes, underwater.
I'm going to open it to the floor now for some questions to Terence about his work. We've got about 10 minutes or so, and we'll conclude with a clip from Of Time in the City. So if you'd like to indicate that you've got a question to ask, I'll get a microphone to you. And then who's next, so I can line up the second. But there's one there. Yeah.
That was great, thanks. I've got a question about your use of sound and music across your body of work and how you make that connection between memory and sound, because it seems like sound sort of haunts all of your films, if that makes any sense.
Well, when I write it, I usually write every track, pan, dissolve, everything that's in it, because that has an actual practical effect on what you can afford. Cranes are very expensive. But the music has to be cleared beforehand. But most of the time, you know, you get the music, but it was at the end of the film, I just thought, it needs something. It just needs something, because she dies. And I remembered listening to Charles Ives, because every 5 years in the classical world, they try to make out that Charles Ives is a great symphonist. Well, he wasn't. They were very odd symphonies, but they're not great. But he wrote 2 wonderful pieces, The Unanswered Question, which we used most at the end, and Decoration Day, which has a very peculiar sound. It's a very peculiar sound world. And I knew that they were right. And my heart goes out to him because he married someone called Melody Twitchett. Isn't that a fabulous name? But you have to feel it. And very often, sometimes, well, not very often, but sometimes you can't clear the copyright. And you think, well, what do I do? I've got to find something else. And usually it's something that's better. But you have to clear it because a lot of the shots are timed to that music. But it comes instinctively. Because I listen all the time. I mean, I've been listening to music, classical music especially, since I was 15. So it comes naturally, and I think, or if we haven't written music in, I think there needs to be something here. I don't know what it is. In Sunset Song, we had to use a Luxembourg composer, and I said, look, keep any music very small, a guitar, an oboe, something very tiny, so that it's almost like Webern, but it's not a big theme. And we gave us a lot of music. I said, no, it's too big. It's too big. Think in terms of it being intimate and small. And that can be very, very powerful. But what's even more powerful than music is silence. Silence is really powerful, especially when there's tension in the room. You know, there's a scene where Emily invites this reverend to tea with his wife, and she's completely humorless. And it's done in 1, 2, 3 shots, that's all. And I said to the dubbing mixer, make all the sounds very loud. So there's no speech, and the water sounds really loud. And the cups chink against each other. It's just so loud. And the reason for that was, when I used to go to a drama class every Thursday at Man Street, which is a boys' school now, I think. And I got friendly with a lad who, like me, was just beginning to find about classical music. Said, come up to the house in Finch Lane on Sunday, we'll play some records. And it was the Bruckner 8th Symphony and the Shostakovich, the Sibelius 5. Anyway, we got there and we played them. Of course, we were in raptures about them. And I was given an apple. And he said, but we've got to stop now because we've got to watch the football with my father on the television. And I cannot bear sport of any kind at all. I thought, oh God. I said, do I have to? And he said, yes, you've got to. All right. Anyway, we'll go into where the television is. And after a while, I thought, well, I'll bite into this apple, you know, when I think there's like a boring bit. And I went, and he looked at me, they scored a goal. And I had this piece of apple in my mouth. So what do I do now? I thought, well, I'll wait until there's another dull bit. And I didn't. He looked at me, they scored another goal. He said, you're doing it deliberately. And I had to swallow to say, I'm not. Agony, utter agony. So that's where that kind of thing comes from. There's nothing worse though than being in somewhere where you're embarrassed. It's truly awful. It's truly awful. It's like, and it's the little things in life that cause terror. I mean, like farting in public. You can't go through life with clenched buttocks, believe me. It's misery.
Or in a tent.
Or in a tent.
So, a microphone there.
Hi, Terence. I'm just wondering, now you're getting the recognition that you finally deserve, do you think it's going to be easier for you to find finance for future films?
No.
No?
The problem is that I will only cast people who are right. I mean, I won't cast people because they're names. I just won't do it. If they're right, I don't care if they're Joe Schmo, they'll get the role. That then makes it difficult to get the next lot of money. And I never ever thought it would be. I mean, I long to have it easy. I long to be a household name like Dettol, but I don't think that's ever going to happen. But as soon as they start talking about names, my heart sinks. You know, we went to Los Angeles in these huge offices. All the agents have the absolute power. They have absolute power. And we looked at one another, Sol and I, we both thought the same thing. What are we doing here? And then you go up, and they're very, very nice men, but everything's phenomenal, it's awesome, and you think, look, it's not. The Grand Canyon is phenomenal. The Pacific is awesome, not some actor. And you get a lot of that, and you come out exhausted, and you think, this has got nothing to do with making films. Also, I disagree with someone being paid $20 million for a film, because there isn't a person alive who's worth that. There just isn't. And I think that's obscene. And it makes me very, very angry, that. But can you imagine having to direct someone who says, well, I've got to live in an inner tube for the next 6 months before I get into this role. You think, just do it, that's what you're paid for. You know, I mean, I've had it on one or two occasions, the moment's gone. I said, yes, but you're paid to recapture it. That's awkward. I said, yes, I know, but they gave me the money. All that kind of nonsense. Luckily, it's only happened 3 times. But you do want to strangle them. You know, the moment's gone. I'm sorry. I said, do you know if I'd said that to my boss when I was a bookkeeper, he would have said, don't bang the door as you go out.
Yes, exactly. Next to you, Maureen, there's this question.
Hey, Terence, thanks for talking to us. I have a question about your process in the last 2 films with regard to actors and how you work with them before you roll the camera. Can you tell us a little bit about how conversations and rehearsals might fit into that process?
Well, it's very simple. It's always been very simple. They come on for the scene, and I've already chosen what the camera positions are. But sometimes you think, no, we only need 3 positions, not 4. Or we need an extra close-up here, so it will become 5. So I know what because if you know what the meaning of the scene is, you know how to shoot it. Then they come on after hair and makeup and costume, and then never longer than 10 minutes. We just run through 10 minutes and say, right, you can tell, let's go now. You can tell when they're right. I don't know how you do it. I just can tell. And that's what you go for, the spontaneity of it. I never go, very rarely beyond 7 takes, because they just become bored. And quite frankly, so do I. In those first 2 or 3 moments, it's alive, because they don't know what they're doing. And what's great about film is that it captures the fleeting moment. Something that, you know, they don't know that they're doing it, but that's what makes it alive. I mean, there's a scene at the end of Deep Blue Sea where Tom Hiddleston has to get his hat. It goes like this, once, twice, 3 times. Of course you've got to put that in, because it makes the leaving even worse. And those cases that were man-made, they're not Samsonite, but they were man-made material. I had forgotten that when you click them down, the interior acts as a sound box, so they sound really loud. And when someone is leaving, and it's like that, everything you hear is loud. So it's getting them to the point where you just know, let's do it now. Sometimes you have to go, when the camera's moving especially, you have to go to 5 or 6. But I mean, there's a scene in Sunset Song where there's a big crane down. I mean, it took all day. And then we went inside and the 2 actors got it in less than 2 takes. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I mean, in the Emily Dickinson, there's a wonderful actress called Joanna Bacon, and she plays the mother and she dies. I was so moved, I couldn't speak. I just could not say cut. And Roy, the other producer, went in and said, no, cut, I'm not going to do it again. And the 3 of them went, well, I think I've got another one in me. You know, and I'm moist from tears. So you go with the moment, you have to go with the moment. It's capturing the moment that's the most exciting thing about film. That in the end, it's about how you respond to what you see. And it's got to be visceral. If it's not visceral, go home. If in the first 2 minutes you don't like what you see, go home, because you just misinterpret everything. You just do. And lots of films are like that. I've been the same way, and I thought, why am I watching this? You know, and especially with the language that is still being used: wide shot, mid, close up, over the shoulder, mid, long. I mean, it's a lifeless language. You can't say anything interesting in that anymore. It's dead. It's exactly like method acting, which when it came out, I mean, was a revelation to see Marlon Brando in On the Waterfront. It came out at the same time as Young at Heart with Doris Day, and I can remember the year. They were both actually born on the same day in 1924. But it's now become so ossified and mannered that you just say, look, I don't want a collection of mannerism. I want it felt. That's much harder because it's so easy to fall into mannerism. Oh, well, I do this well, so I'll do that again. No, feel it. And that's much more difficult. Much more difficult, but when you see it, it is a joy. It's so thrilling.
Yeah, and we'll have to make this the last question before we finish, so thank you. Yeah.
Hi. Who's your favourite actor that you've worked with in all your films?
My favourite actor?
Yeah.
It's very hard. I think it's Frida Dowie, who played my mother in Distant Voices Still Lives. And when my mother died, my sister Maisie, who had organised the funeral, said, can we play something, from the film? I said, yes, please, would you play Love is a Many Splendid Thing and For All You've Been to Me, My Thanks to You. And we played it, and my sister said, it was lovely to hear Mother's voice again. I said, but that's actually Frida Dowie. And she died recently, and no one, not even her agent, told me, because I would have gone to her funeral, because she was a great, great actress. And I remember, I'd always loved her, because whenever she was on television, no matter how small the role, she was always good. And I asked someone to get me a set of Spotlight with all the actors in. And I said, can you give me the A to K, or whatever it is? And they gave it to me, I dropped it on the floor, and it opened at her page. And I rang and said, will you do it? Do you want me to read? I said, no, will you just do it? And she was, I shall never forget how wonderful she was, because she was just like my mother, full of love and stoic, like my mother was. So she's my favourite, I think, but I'm biased because she was so good as my mother.
Now, before we finish, we've got one final clip to play, and this is from Terence's documentary of Time in the City, which is really his poetic, lyrical depiction of his home city, Liverpool, produced by Sol and Roy Bolter from Hurricane Films in 2008. So,
Showplace of the North, the Ritz Theatre, Birkenhead, again presents a replica Royal Film performance.
Hooray for Hollywood, that's good with Ballyhooly, Hollywood, where any office boy or young mechanic...
At 7, I saw Gene Kelly in Singing in the Rain and discovered the movies, loved them, and swallowed them whole.
...can be a top girl if she pleases the tired businessman.
And my love was as muscular as my Catholicism, but without any of the drawbacks. Musicals, melodramas, westerns, nothing was too rich or too poor for my rapacious appetite, and I gorged myself with a frequency that would shame a sinner. But soon, darker pleasures. At 15, I saw Dirk Bogarde in Victim and discovered something entirely different. And when I was not at the movies, on Friday nights I was at the Liverpool Stadium watching the wrestling. Not for its pantomimic villainy, but for something more illicit. And in short, I was afraid. As I struggled with my adolescent desires, as I waited at the top of the aisle as the wrestlers swaggered up from the ring, their trunks tight across the buttocks, I could feel their body heat as I furtively touched a back or a thigh, choking with schoolboy guilt and trembling with the fear of the wrath of God. Oh, say...
So who knew Birkenhead was a Hollywood... Who knew Birkenhead was the Hollywood of the Northwest? So I'm afraid we'll come to an end in here with this session, but I'm sure that Terence will be happy to chat with you during our reception, which is in the atrium just outside. Before we finish, I'd just like to thank Andrea for such a great introduction, Danny, who's been on the decks sorting out the clips, great colleague at ICE, and of course, Terence, for coming this evening and entertaining us with such a stimulating conversation. And I hope we all will get to see A Quiet Passion later this year and look forward to Terence's future films, one of which is about the poet Siegfried Sassoon. So thank you, Terence.